Hello, welcome to History 1301. This is U.S. history up to 1877. My name is Alfonso R. Lopez, and I'll be your instructor for this course this fall semester. Now, what we're going to be doing in this video presentation is to offer a class introduction. So you will be acquainted with the course requirements in terms of, for example, textbooks, exams, assignments, and the like. We're going to also be talking about extra credit assignments. And we're also going to cover quite briefly the course content as well. What we're going to be covering in this class, how we're going to organize the material, the topics that will be presented to you as well, and how you're going to be learning as well. This material, the mode of learning, the method of instruction will be explained. What are your responsibilities taking this class in terms of weekly assignments? We're going to be talking about all of that. We're going to be talking about grading, all the major factors that come into play at the end of the semester. And we're also going to be looking at the Blackboard course page. That way you'll be able to identify where the materials are located, the assignments, the video instruction that you're responsible to watch on a weekly basis, and so on, and where you're supposed to also submit all of this work by the due date. Okay. All right. So consider this video presentation a very, very critical piece of information that is going to really make your life easier, let us just say, taking this course, because you'll learn everything that you need to know in order to not only identify the major components of this course in this new platform that we're using on Blackboard Ultra, but also you're going to become very much acquainted with what is required in this course, and you'll be able to really just and very smoothly be able to complete all of the assignments and exams if you follow, of course, the instructions. And you'll be able not only to pass this class, but you'll be able to also thrive, really get a higher score at the end of the semester. Okay. All right, so let us now turn our attention to the main screen. We're going to now look at the Blackboard page. So when you open Blackboard, it takes you to the content section. Of course, there's a menu bar at the very top. You can select whether you're attempting to look at the content or the announcements or your grades or messages, etc. So the content page is really the most important of them all, because this is the main section where all of the materials are located, whether we're talking about the syllabus or we're talking about the instructional materials, the course assignments, and the like. Everything is really located here. Okay. Now, at the very top of this page, the content page, you're going to see, it's not yet visible as of now. It will be by tomorrow when I post this video presentation. I'm going to actually send an email announcement to the class that the video is ready to review. It's going to be located at the very top, this class introduction. When you click on it, you're going to see the video, on YouTube. Okay. So I highly recommend that you watch this video presentation very thoroughly, perhaps even take notes if possible, because it will answer most of the questions that students have, prior to taking a course. They feel sometimes lost, taking an online class, because again, they will have to kind of, in a certain sense, figure it out on their own when they open the page, where the assignments are located, what are the responsibilities. But this is a very, very good guidance and orientation. And I highly recommend that you watch this from beginning to end because, once again, students who do not do this very often feel pretty much lost. And they email me with questions and the like. Of course, I'm here to provide the answers and guidance. But in many cases, the questions that I receive from time to time across the semester are things that I already kind of covered and answered, in the class introduction. Okay, even the rules, there will be certain, policies that we're going to cover in this video presentation that are critical to know. Okay, so just below the video presentation, you're going to see the syllabus, and this is what we're going to be doing today. I mean, this is like the first day of class when you meet the instructor, and the instructor will explain everything about the course, the mechanics, the technical stuff, the procedures, the content and the like. Okay, so when you click on it, you will see that there's a file which can be read outright. If you click on it, you can also choose to download the syllabus to save it in your computer or laptop, etc. Okay, to keep it handy. All right, so let's go over the syllabus. So once again, this is History 1301. I'm teaching 3 sections of 1301. They're identical. I believe one is section 032, the other one is 058, and the other one is 067. So if you're enrolled in any of those sections, you're in the right class. Okay. My name is, once again, Alfonso R. Lopez. The fastest and easiest way to reach me is via email. Now, I understand that Blackboard Ultra has a link to course messages, and students feel very much compelled to use them to address questions and concerns, etc., regarding the class. But it is much easier when you send your questions and concerns via email. When you use your email account, ACC, by the way, is policy by ACC that all communication between faculty and students take place within the ACC supplied systems, the electronic systems. Okay, so what that means is that if you send me an email from your private email account, I'm not going to answer to that email just because it's the college policy. Okay, but what I'm trying to say here is that although I'll be checking the Blackboard messages, emails are much easier to handle because I'm checking my email several times a day, every day. Okay, so if you send me an email between Monday and Friday, you'll be receiving a response from me within a 24-hour period. It can be, of course, within hours, or it can be within the 24-hour mark. But it's very, very easy to identify. I'm notified immediately. You got an email, and I respond, of course. During the weekends, I might respond within a 48-hour period, meaning that once the next week begins on Monday, you'll be receiving a response from me. Okay, so that is my policy regarding communication. I highly, highly recommend that you address your concerns via email. Okay, now there's going to be one required textbook for this course, and it is a companion to the actual textbook that we're not going to be using. We're going to be using the Reader, which is a very, very small booklet, if you will. It's a companion. It's really a collection of historical documents, what is called primary sources. So it's not a book to be read from cover to cover, but rather it's really a selection of very important documents written or produced by historical figures in U.S. history. And why you're going to be needing this textbook or book in this case is to complete a course assignment that is due at the end of the semester. Okay? So this is not something that you're going to be using to follow up the lectures, if you will, but rather this is totally oriented for you to gain insights into the ideas and thoughts and views of very important figures, to hear their voices directly without any interpretation. And I will present to you a series of questions on those documents for you to answer, and all of that again constitute the assignment. We're going to be talking about the assignment once we get to that section of the syllabus. Okay, I believe this reader is sold at the ACC Highland bookstore at Highland campus. Okay, that is the ACC bookstore that carries this particular text, and I highly recommend that you try buying it as soon as possible. You might say, well, we don't really need it outright because we're not going to be using it, for instruction purposes necessarily. Why do I need it outright? Well, it is because this assignment, although it's not going to take a lot of your time, it does require, of course, some attention, maybe week by week, doing an assignment or so. I will be selecting about 10 documents, by the way, from this book for you to read. They're very short reads, by the way. It's about 3 pages each document and answering the questions. So that's one. I mean, you need time to do it. It's not very time consuming, but I mean, you need to spend some time doing this work. But also, the other reason why I suggest buying this book as quickly as possible is because the ACC bookstores send back unsold copies at midpoint in the semester, assuming that students who did not buy the text by then perhaps bought the text elsewhere, okay, from another vendor and so on, okay? And so they start pretty much sending everything back. And now when students wait long enough, let us just say until October, to start really now getting the textbook to do the assignment, they find out that the bookstores don't carry it anymore. It's out of stock. They're going to have to rely on online vendors, which is going to take some days, again, for you to receive the book. So that's why I suggest buying this book. I think new is $30 or so. This is the only financial investment in textbooks you're going to be making in this course. So again, that's, I think, the good news, right? All right, so this is an online asynchronous course. So it's totally delivered online without any designated class meetings whatsoever. So it's a very convenient format to take this course because instruction is all delivered online. And of course, although students can tailor their own schedules as to when they're going to be spending their time reviewing the materials, students nonetheless have to each week spend some time, discipline themselves to cover what is required for that week. Because postponing, of course, weekly responsibilities, if I'm saying, okay, you have to be watching a couple of videos each week, and if you postpone that, by the next week you have 4 videos to watch, and so on. You get the idea. So just try to manage your time in a way that for sure each week you are watching the 2 lectures, the 2 videos for that week, and so on. Okay. So it is a very convenient format, once again, that allows students to kind of conduct their own activities and work responsibilities, family, etc. But, once again, although it is very convenient, it requires some discipline as well. Okay. All right. So now let's move on with the syllabus. And at this point, we have to discuss the course content description, what we're going to be covering in this first half of U.S. history. So this first half of U.S. history covers all American history going back as far as the ancient world to look at the formation, let us just say, of the United States by looking at the different civilizations, so to speak, that somehow made possible the formation of this country. So we start in the ancient world by looking at Native Americans, Native American history. We look at their civilizations, their societies, cultures, their religions, and the like, all the way to 1492. 1492, let us just say, it is a critical breaking point in Native American history because that marked the beginning of a totally new era in Native American history, because that signaled the arrival of another civilization from a different part of the world, and that is, of course, the Europeans, the discovery of America by Columbus. So we start with the Native Americans and looking at their contributions in this continent in terms of their developments in political, economic, religious, cultural, and so on. And then we shift gears and look at Europe as well. We look at the mother cultures of Europe. We look at the ancient Greeks and Romans, quite briefly, by the way, just looking at their major contributions to European civilization. We look at the massive expansion of the Roman Empire as one of the perhaps great civilizers, if you will, of Europe in the ancient world, building a vast landed empire that covered most of Europe, not all. And we look at the fall of the Roman Empire and the formation of the different principalities and kingdoms during the age of feudalism. It's called feudalism, again, the Middle Ages. And subsequently, we look at how Europe got out of the Middle Ages and moved into a new era, the era of discovery, the age of discovery. You know, we look at different factors, of course, that pushed Europe to pursue this mission, this crusade to start really exploring the world around them, developing systems of navigation in order to explore the ocean and make a series of discoveries that led ultimately to the discovery of America in 1492. And what we're going to be looking at here specifically is the development of long distance trade. You know, how the rise of long distance trade networks between Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, particularly China and India, with the Silk Road, for example, silks and then spices and the like, teas and gold and the like, how this new economic system that connected different civilizations in different parts of the world led to the age of discovery. Of course, long distance trade was really a process that connected different cultures, communities, societies together commercially, and that revolutionized systems of transportation, like navigation, for example. That's what the Europeans were attempting to do, revolutionize their navigation systems in order to speed up the pace of trade, to bring in more and more cargo from Asia, particularly spices, and that led the Europeans to start exploring, of course, the world, because they wanted to open up new trade routes to speed up the pace of trade. So we're going to be paying close attention to economics in this case. It's not going to be just economics in this course by any stretch of the imagination, but we have to look at the forces of history, what was really pushing history forward. in many regards, and one was, of course, trade. Okay, we see a series of changes in Europe. Of course, the formation of banks, the formation of plantations, the formation of trading companies, what we today call the modern corporation, for example. We see all of that. The early stages of capitalism emerged starting around the 1300s. I mean, this is the early stages of capitalism. It was not capitalism by any stretch of the imagination. Once again, it was just the early stages of this new age of commerce. And of course, that allowed for the Europeans to travel long distances using their new navigation systems, and eventually they arrived to America. So we see the encounters of two worlds, the Native American world and the European world, coming together with this age of discovery. The Europeans came into the New World, initially believing to have arrived to Asia, India. That's why the Native Americans were called Indians in this case. And once they realized this was a totally new landmass they have discovered, we're going to see the process of settlement and colonization. The Europeans, starting with the Spaniards, who sponsored Columbus, and then followed by the Portuguese, later on the French, the Dutch, and the British, started arriving to America in order to not just settle and form new communities, which of course that was part of what they were doing, but rather that the process of colonization was part of this new age of commerce, in which the European kingdoms that I just mentioned saw in the New World a new economic opportunity, a new commercial opportunity to make more and more money, particularly gold and silver, extract the resources of the New World in order to trade them for gold. So there is an economic, of course, incentive in this process of colonization, that the Europeans were moving into the New World in order to form different kinds of enterprises, whether it's mining to extract silver and gold, to develop plantations in order to grow cash crops like sugar, tobacco, rice, cotton, coffee, indigo, and the like. Cash crops that could be sold around the world, traded for gold, once again. Or they were arriving in order to tap into other kinds of resources, whether it was timber or fish or furs, forming in the process companies. Okay, this is a economic process. Okay, colonization was driven by this economic drive, this economic goal of extracting the wealth, the resources of the New World in order to transfer it to Europe, and from Europe to send it around the world, trade it for gold. This very much explains the rise of Europe to the world stage, to world prominence. You know, the incredible wealth that we're going to see building up in Europe, all the transformations that all of the kingdoms of Europe underwent. You know, their riches, their treasures being filled with gold and silver, and, you know, building trading empires and starting colonizing different parts of the world, and in the process building large navies and armies, etc. All of that process was driven by the discovery of America and, of course, the settlement and colonization of the New World by Europeans. In other words, the American continent became an extension of Europe economically. It was becoming integrated into the European economy. In this case, the mineral wealth and the resources, etc., that have been mined and extracted, okay, from this continent. So again, we're going to be covering this in this course, you know, how the colonization process unfolded and how this affected, of course, Europe economically. Now, there is, of course, another dimension to colonization, and besides economics, religion was another force that was driving this process in history, meaning that there was yet another reason why many Europeans left the continent in order to pursue a new life, a new beginning on the other side of the Atlantic in the New World, and start up new colonies, so to speak. And of course, that was religion. The fact of the matter is that the Christian church in Europe was experiencing turmoil and divisions. This is the divisions between Protestants and Catholics. Many people left the Catholic Church in protest. They were known as the Protestants. And the persecution and the wars between those two groups led many Europeans to flee that climate of violence. And so we see also the formation of certain colonies, particularly in North America, by Great Britain, in this case, in North America. And we see the arrival of religious communities, religious exiles, coming to North America in order to build their religious societies and religious communities. We're going to also analyze all of that, whether we're talking about the Puritans and the Quakers and some other groups that formed a series of colonies in North America. Then our course is going to look into another historical period, and that is the colonial period. That is to say, we're going to see the development of colonial life. Okay, so this is a process that unfolded, let us just say, from 1607 all the way to the end of the colonial period, with the end of the American Revolution in 1783. So, in the colonial period, we're going to examine some critical themes that, from my perspective, helped shape colonial society. We're talking about specifically the 13 colonies that England established in North America. Okay. One of those critical themes is the development of the transatlantic slave trade. Okay. The introduction of African slavery, particularly in the southern colonies, Virginia, the Carolinas, and Georgia. Okay. Why the transatlantic slavery and African slavery particularly is going to help shape those colonies is because the southern colonies, as we'll see in this course, took a whole different form from the northern colonies. The southern colonies were plantation colonies, totally devoted for the production of cash crops, tobacco, and cotton, and indigo and rice, particularly. Okay, this is what the British were doing. They were really establishing agricultural companies in the South devoted for the production of cash crops. So they needed labor, however, and initially they tried to bring in indentured servants from Europe in order to do that. And we're going to examine how indentured servitude in the 1600s was implemented, particularly in Virginia, for instance, and how that system became so unstable that it started producing uprisings and revolts. The indentured servants were revolting against their masters and so on. And in order to solve that problem of instability and revolts, we see the major critical decision made at the turn of that century, in the 16th to the 1700s, to do away with indentured servitude, and instead of using indentured servants, that it will be preferable, more stable from their perspective, to bring in African slaves. Okay, we're going to examine all of that, of course. And once they made that decision, to bring in African slaves, we're going to see the South taking a whole different shape. Those are going to be societies, those are going to be called, of course, slave societies, dominated by very wealthy planters that relied on the work and labor of African slaves. And that was the kind of society that took form in the South. It's called feudalism. Okay, it's really, I think, feudalism is really any society characterized by masters and slaves, pretty much, or masters and serfs. Okay, pretty much the same thing. Okay. In the North, of course, what we see is a whole different view. In the North, what we have is religious societies. We mentioned the Quakers and the Puritans. And although slavery was introduced somewhat in the North, it was not critical for the functioning of those colonies. So we're going to see kind of the division of the 13 colonies between the northern colonies and the southern colonies. And this is what we're going to examine, of course, in the colonial period. We're going to look at other critical issues, of course, in the colonial period. We're going to look at the religious colonies, how they were evolving and developing, and how generations of religious communities were changing over time, abandoning the faith, abandoning religion, and how those religious communities attempted to restore Christian values and Christian principles in their own societies. Okay, so this part of the story in U.S. history. Again, Christianity is an integral part of the foundation of the country. As we can see, again, those are the Protestants that ended up arriving to North America. But what is also important to note is how Christians from time to time have attempted to restore and preserve their Christian teachings and values, despite, of course, changes taking place in their own societies. As people abandon the church or abandon the religion or question their faith, we see, of course, a reaction and response to that. Okay, we see, of course, the attempt to spread Christianity far and wide in North America by the Christians, trying to Christianize or convert the Native Americans on one hand, but also the African slaves as well. We're going to examine all of those issues. Okay. We're also going to examine relationships between the European settlers and the Native Americans, however. It was not just religious, it was commercial. There were, of course, commercial transactions, trade between them, but also there was conflict. And we're going to pay attention to the conflict dimension as well. At the end of the colonial period, we see the process of independence. We're going to examine very closely the reasons why the 13 colonies in North America decided to break away from the British Empire. Okay, there, of course, were economic reasons, taxes implemented on the colonies by Britain, the regulation of trade, trying to restrict trading activities in the colonies, controlling their currency and the like. But also there were ideological reasons in that there were new ideas proposed, written in the 1700s that call for the formation of what today we call democratic states, in which citizens will have rights and their rights being protected by the state. And so all of those ideas, the ideas of liberty, the ideas of civil rights, what back then was called human rights or natural rights, the will of the people and so on, all of those ideas were really innovated during the 1700s, and that led, of course, to an intellectual revolution that kind of propelled the colonists to declare independence. So we close the colonial period with the independence movement. And then the last section of this course is going to look at the early national period, from the formation of the United States as a republic all the way to the Civil War and the Reconstruction era that ended in 1877. All right, so in the national period, we're going to look at three topics. We're going to look at, in this case, the formation of the United States, how the founding fathers crafted two constitutions in order to mold a nation, a country. We're going to take a look at the two constitutions that were written during this time, and we're going to look at some of the challenges that the United States faced once it was built in the Constitution. We're going to look at the first decades of nationhood and how the nation struggled to keep together, if you will, and kind of national unity. It also kind of become a totally sovereign country that will gain the respect and recognition of the European superpowers. Again, we're going to look at that. Another topic will be totally concentrated on perhaps the most transformative historical event of the early 19th century that really shaped the United States the way it is today, and that is the Industrial Revolution, the first Industrial Revolution. We're going to get to see that, and we're going to see how the North, in this case, particularly the Northeast of the country, industrialized with the beginning of the machine age, machinery, factories, railroads, for instance, navigation systems, canals, and so on within the United States, the beginning of capitalism, pretty much, wage labor and the like, the rise of industrial cities. Americans were moving now into the city to work in factories and the like. We're going to see that very closely, and how the South lagged behind in following the footsteps, of course, of the Industrial Revolution, due to the fact that the South decided not to build factories, not to industrialize. Instead, they decided to expand their system of plantation agriculture in order to grow the cotton that the industries required. Okay, so there was a global demand for cotton because of the Industrial Revolution, and the South positioned itself again in the midst of this global demand, and they started pretty much expanding their agricultural base. But at the same time that they expanded their plantation agriculture base, they also expanded their system of labor that went with it, and that is slavery. So we see the massive expansion of African slavery in the South that made the South even more dependent on that system of labor than ever before. And of course, that is going to divide even further the regions in the United States, the northern region that was industrializing versus the southern region that was not, and instead relying on slave labor. Okay? So the last topic we're going to cover deals with the ultimate conflict between those two regions, and that is the Civil War. Civil War was a war between the northern states against the southern states, of course. So we're going to get to examine all of the different reasons why the Union was broken in 1860. It was really, of course, a conflict rooted in many, many kinds of differences. The most important one was the economic system that governed each region. Industrial capitalism in the north and plantation agriculture in the south. And of course, each region has their own elites. We have the manufacturers and the industrial elites in the north, and we got the planters, the masters, if you will, in the south. Each one of them were extremely wealthy and influential, and they were competing over the influence and control of the federal government, of course, to favor policies that will either protect and benefit their own section, whether it was the northern industries or the plantations in the south. And of course, there was no compromise at the end of the day, and that produced the Civil War. This is something we're going to get to see, the war itself, the development, and the final defeat of the South, and how the North attempted to rebuild the South in order to reunite the country. This is what's called Reconstruction, of course. So this is what we're going to be covering in the entire semester. I tried to kind of synthesize all of this information in this past 20-25 minutes. But this is what you're going to be learning, and how you're going to be learning all of this material. The mode of learning is that I have recorded all of my lectures, which are identical to the kinds of lectures I provide in person. So I have created a virtual classroom, so to speak, in which students can feel as if they're in class, like they're actually in the classroom, they're listening to the instructor, they're watching the instructor. I'm using the same software that I'm using right now, so you can see the instructor, you can hear him, and you will also look at the screen and you will be able to see the outlines I provide in the projector. For example, in my classrooms, I put my outlines, which contain bullet points and maps and pictures and the like. It's really just the virtual experience of an in-class format. All of the lectures have been recorded. They're already posted on Blackboard. Under, if you go back to instructional materials, you click on this link, instructional materials, and you'll be able to see two folders. One is called the recorded video lectures. If you click on it, you will see 9 folders, because there are 9 topics for this class, 9 topics. Okay, and with those topics I already explained again in the last 25 minutes or so. Okay, so when you click on one of those folders, let's say Native American History, Culture, and Religion, you will see 3 videos, session 1, 2, and 3. They span for about an hour and 20 minutes, which is the duration of a regular class in campus. And so you click on that and you'll see my lecture there. Okay. Your responsibility is to watch the lecture, pay attention to the explanation of the different concepts and so on that are presented in the outlines. The outlines tell you what it is important, what you need to be noting down, and try to write as much as possible. You don't have to write word for word what I'm explaining. So it's not required. You have to develop a skill of listening with one part of your brain and mechanically with the other part of your brain do the writing. Okay, so he's actually talking about Native Americans. He's actually explaining, let I just say, that in the Stone Age, the Native Americans develop different kinds of tools. All right, so you take notes of that. They used to be hunters and gatherers and so on. They lived in small groups of people called bands, and they traveled together. They were nomadic. You write that, of course. And this is their religion. They develop a religion based on spirits. Again, that the world was moved and populated by spirits. Okay, so you write all of that. And if I explain certain rituals, you have to also take note of the rituals and try to explain them and so on. This is what is required for you. So watch the lectures as if you were in class. Take notes, because all of this material is going to be covered in the exams and nothing else. So in other words, for the exams, you don't need anything else other than the lectures. That's key for passing this class. You don't need to be following any kinds of readings, any other kind of sources of any kind, but just the lectures. Okay, this is critical. And every week I will be sending email announcements indicating which are the lectures that you are supposed to be watching again for this week. It can be Monday and Wednesday, or let it just say Tuesdays and Thursday. I'll select 2 days, and I will be sending you an email announcement that, oh, for this week you're supposed to be watching the first session of Native American history, and then the other day I will say watch session 2 of Native American history, and so on. Week by week, I'll just be sending you reminders, okay, of what you need to be doing. Once again, if you decide not to, for some reason, watch those 2 lectures, please be reminded that the following week you will have to somehow catch up again with those lectures. Although you'll have 2 additional ones coming up for that week. Okay, so they're accumulating, of course. Okay, so 9 topics, and each topic contains 3 sessions or 3 lectures per topic. Okay, let us go back to the syllabus. So this is the way the instruction takes place. You are presented with a series of recorded video lectures. You watch 2 per week, and this is how we're going to be proceeding from week to week. Okay, we cover, of course, 9 topics. They are listed right here in this index. They're titled, each one, and divided by the eras. We explained the ancient world, the colonial world, and the early national period. Now, the reason why I don't use any textbook for my courses is because my lectures do not come from a single source. In other words, I don't just read a book and kind of recite what the book says back to you. You know, that would be redundant. You know, if the instructor assigns a book and all he does is that kind of just recites that back to us, well, why do I need to actually pay attention to the lecture? You know, I just read the book. But textbooks in general, tend to be quite limited in many cases. What I've done is that instead of following a book, what I've done is that I've created my lectures based on a multiplicity of sources. The books I read along the way since I started, studying history back in the 1990s, by the way. Articles, documentaries, many kinds of sources, that I have studied, particularly in my doctorate degree and research, etc. Okay, so what I've done is that I assembled those lectures from a multiplicity of sources, and they just do not concentrate on one aspect of history. In other words, I know that there are some history courses that kind of rely heavily on political and economic issues. Okay, you're studying politicians and political parties, elections, and how the economy is doing, and so on. Although I do cover that, my lectures tend to concentrate on other areas of human activity. Religion, culture, society, how society is composed, the different groupings, the different classes, and the like, how those groups interact and the like. I also use psychology, I use anthropology, I use philosophy, political science, and the like, other fields in academia that complement history. Because as you'll find out rather quickly is that when I'm lecturing, I'm constantly psychoanalyzing historical figures. I'm trying to get into their mindset as much as possible. So you're going to kind of find out right away, when you start actually paying attention to the lectures, that this is not just kind of like, oh, you have to memorize dates and names and events, but rather we're trying to explain why things happen in history. What moves people, what motivates them, how do they see the world around them, what shaped their thinking, what kind of upbringing they had, what kind of ideas were instilled in them, and so on, how ideas change people's views of the world, and from that they create change and so on. So I really pay a lot of attention to the world of ideas, meanings, beliefs and the like. That's why I examine religion, I examine culture and the like. Okay, rituals. So again, this is a more in-depth view of human history. Okay, and of course, I also pay attention to science and technology, the environment, because they also shape human history. Every time there's technological change, scientific change, or environmental change, humans change accordingly. Okay, now this is what is actually changing human history from time to time. Okay, now once we cover 3 topics, we have an exam. It is about in a 5-week period that we cover fully 3 topics, and then we have an exam that is going to cover the material of those 3 topics. Okay, so there will be 3 exams for this course, as you can see. And the exams, this is very critical. I mean, this is something I want to stress, and I want to talk about not only the format of the exams and how you prepare for them, but also there are certain caveats and certain warnings and policies, again, regarding the exams that you need to become very, very, very aware of. Okay? Now, the exams are not going to be given on a specific day and time. So they're not timed. In other words, to take place, let us just say on a Tuesday at this time, and you use, the Blackboard page in order to take the exam right there again on a specific time. It's more like a writing assignment. So you have 5 weeks to complete each exam, pretty much. So, I mean, this is the format. So consider the exams more like a writing assignment in which you have to address certain questions and also key themes that I present for you to elaborate. And the main source that you're going to use, the only source, by the way, that is allowed for you to use is the video lecture and nothing else. Okay, just the video lecture. So the exam has, each exam is really formatted identical. They have the identical format, but it consists of 2 parts. Let us just go back to, let us just say the exam section. Let us just say, you can actually open it here under course assignments. Course assignments has all of the assignments for this course. All of the assignments. Okay, as you can see, first exam, second exam, final exam, and the study questions report, those are actually required and mandatory to pass this course. The extra credit assignments you can see on the bottom, those are actually optional. They're not mandatory. Okay, so let's just open the first exam so you can see rather quickly how this is organized. So again, it consists of 2 parts. The topic section, and it says choose one topic, just one, and answer all of the questions as fully as possible. So you can either do the Native American history or you do the European topic. Okay? So what is really telling you right here, I mean, is that, okay, so in the exam, I just need to address in part 1, one topic out of 2. So you select the topic that you feel most inspired, so on. You want to learn more about that, okay? So you concentrate on that, okay? So this is not really an essay. This is just answer the 4 questions that are presented to you in that topic. Some topics have 3, some others have 4 questions. But if it's 3 or 4, just answer those questions in that order by writing the question first and then the answer. Question and answer. Question and answer. Okay? Very simple. So, topic 1, it is required for you to write at least 5 full pages answering the questions. Be very thorough, explain everything in great detail. Don't skip any, elaborations or explanations, assuming that I know what you're talking about. The more you write, the more you explain, the higher your grade will be. Okay? For part 2, there are certain key themes from another topic. So everybody must do the topic on religion, topic number 3. Okay? So this is critical that everybody will have to watch topic number 3, because here I present 6 key themes for you to elaborate, and you're supposed to select 3 and answer them as fully as possible. This is not just definition. This is a theme that you will have to elaborate. You have to explain. In other words, not just identify. You have to describe and explain very fully what that is. Okay, for 30 points. Okay, so you have about 5 weeks to complete each one of those exams. This is the first exam, by the way. Now, the instructions tells very, very clearly that the entire work must consist of material obtained from the lectures, only from the lectures. So what that means is that any other kind of outside source, doesn't matter what that source is. It can be your own prior knowledge. Maybe you took a class previously and you learned something about that, and it can be a book you read, it can be internet, it can be etc. It doesn't matter. So if I start reading in your response to something that I did not present in the video lectures, your work will be disqualified. Okay? So this is something that has to be totally understood, regarding the exams. That, yeah, you have this 5-week period to complete it. It's a writing assignment. You have all the time of the world, and you have, of course, your sources available, and you have the opportunity to watch the lectures and be, writing the exam. But students who do not follow the instructions and say, well, why should I watch the lectures? I'm just going to go online or maybe read one book, etc. It doesn't matter. And I'm just going to just, use outside sources. They're going to fail the course. Okay? Because when you're taking a class, you're taking a class with a specific instructor that is bringing very unique perspective and analysis and content about the subject matter that you're studying. And if you're not watching that, if you're not reviewing the material, so it's almost like you're not actually in class. You're not attending class. If this was an in-class format, is similar as not actually being present. I did not actually attend class. I did not learn anything from them. Just gather something from the outside and I wrote it. That's, again, not allowed in this class. Okay, so I want you to understand that this is the way that this exam is formatted, and this is the requirement. Okay. There are some students that decide to transcribe my lectures. They use software, they use certain applications and technologies to just transcribe my video lectures, and they just submit all of my transcriptions. That's also not allowed and not accepted, because what that means is that you did not watch the lectures. You just put a certain program, in progress to do that, and that you submitted the transcription. That's not an original work. Okay, it's not an original work. It's not coming from the student, in other words. Okay, it is mechanically generated. Okay, so those are very, very critical, again, issues that must be understood quite clearly. Now, going back to the syllabus, there is, of course, a certain policy. This is the moment where we have to talk about AI, of course, This is a new technology that just came out that students are now using and is becoming, of course, an issue in colleges and universities across the United States, because this is presenting, of course, a dilemma for a lot of both students and also instructors, professors, and that is, well, maybe the students are not learning anything because now this new technology is doing the work for them, the research for them, and even their writing for them. So, they're not developing their faculties of critical thinking. They're not developing their faculties of reading and comprehension. They're not learning anything because, a machine is doing their work for them. Okay. So who gets the credit? Okay. In some courses, this might be allowed because it is totally understandable because of this content or the subject matter, the field that you're studying. But in history, again, this is not allowed. So my policy regarding artificial intelligence and also internet sources for that matter is that the use of AI and other internet sources for answering the online exams are strictly prohibited. Okay, and I can spot this right away. Okay, I can spot AI generated writing. I can spot it, and also the sources. I mean, it is very clear when students are answering, even though it is very eloquent and very articulate. How it is presented and written. It's very, very evident that this does not belong to anything, the ideas, the concept, the events, the analysis that I have presented in this class, of course. So please be reminded here that the use of such technologies are not allowed, and it will result in failing grades, okay, the disqualification of the work altogether. So when answering the exam, once again, it is very important to only use the material covered in the video lectures, and that the responses that you're providing are coming from the student, from you. This is an original work you're presenting, okay? There will be 3 extra credit assignments for this course. We're nearing the end again of this video. This is, again, not mandatory. This is totally optional. If you want to add up to 10 points to each exam, I have posted 3 extra credit assignments. They're located under course assignments. When you click there, at the very bottom, you're going to see a folder, extra credit assignments, and you're going to find 3 extra credit assignments. You find the instructions and the article. You read an article, and then you answer some questions on the article, and then you submit it. I'll talk about where everything is submitted in just a few moments here. But again, this is a wonderful opportunity to add up to 10 points to each exam. So if you score for some reason a 78 in the first exam, with the extra credit assignment, you can add up to 10 points for an 88 grade. Okay, those are added to your exams. So again, your grades are not set in stone. This is a flexible course in which the student is presented with plenty of opportunities to improve and progress, like the extra credit assignments. Okay. Now, before we move forward, it is also important that students understand that there's a deadline for dropping without any consequences, at least that I'm aware of, regarding your GPA and your financial aid and so on. Because after the deadline, let's say a student is failing, but they've just forgot to drop by the deadline, then whatever grade they receive, it will be, it will appear under transcript at the end of the semester. Okay, and that is November 20th. November 20th is the deadline to withdraw from this course. It is really an emergency. You're under certain emergencies in your life, etc., work-related, etc., schedules and the like. I understand, and I respect your decision. But if you're struggling and you feel that if you're granted perhaps an extension on an assignment, etc., that you can fulfill all of the course requirements and submit all the work and so on, please talk to me, send me an email, and we can arrange, of course, an extension. Of course, if it is workable, if you feel that you can actually pass this course, but you're struggling because of other activities and work and so on, schedules, okay, please talk to me, of course. Now we arrive to the section of the course assignment. There is going to be a major course assignment that is due at the end of the semester, and we're talking about December 5th. Okay. That is really the end of the semester, nearing the end, pretty much. Okay, it's called the Study Questions Report, and this is where this book comes in. You need this textbook in order to complete this assignment. I have selected 10 documents for you to read, and I have presented a series of questions for you to answer. Okay. All the instructions are here in the syllabus, and they're also available in the section titled Course Assignments, the Study Questions Report. Okay, you follow the instructions as presented here. It tells you the chapter number, the page number, the title of the document, and the questions. How to do this? Well, follow a question and answer format, just like the exams. The exams are similar. You state the question and then the answer very fully, and then the other one by one, so on. So here you write the title of the document on the very top of the page, like swimmer as told to James Mooney, for example. Okay, origins of disease and medicine. Okay, at the very top. And then question and answer, and you reach one page, double space. Okay, and then when you move into the second document, you start once again on the top of the page, write the title of the document, and then follow a question and answer, and write another page, double space. So each document must consist the answers per document. There might be 2 or 3 questions, doesn't matter. But all of the answers for those questions per document have to be one full page. So at the end of the day, once you complete this assignment, you're going to end up with a 10-page report. Everything is saved in the same document, the same file, Word or PDF, by the way. The same with the exams. Please, when you submit the exams, they have to be saved either on Word or PDF file. Okay, because Blackboard has a lot of difficulties opening applications that are not Word or PDF. Again, it's very difficult. So there's a lot of students that their exams are not graded, and even though I inform them, they don't go back and resubmit the work, and they end up failing the course just because the words couldn't be opened. Okay, their files in this case. Okay. And so again, the due date is December 5th, for this. The grade distribution, there are 4 major grades, 25% each. Each exam is 25% each, and the study questions report, 25% each, that's 100. If you consider the extra credit assignments, adding points, that's another factor that comes into the equation. And I want to also inform you that I also take into account at the end of the semester, I also take into account 2 factors, and that is effort and progress. If you're progressing, if I see that your grades from the first, second, and final exam are moving up from a 70 to an 80 to an A, let us just say. Okay, so that's progress. I mean, you are demonstrating that you're disciplining yourself, you're committed, you're doing the work, you're trying to improve. That has to be, of course, rewarded. And if you submitted an extra credit assignment or two, that's effort as well. So if you end up, let us just say, in an 88 grade average, 88.2 or 3 or 5, despite the fact that you were progressing and making great efforts trying to improve your grade, that has to be compensated. And very often what I do is I will give you the final push and get you to the A range. Okay, if I see those two factors have to be present. It's not automatic that when I see an 88 or 88.75 and so on, that I immediately push the students into the next letter grade. No, I have to see, again, progress and effort. Okay. At the end of the document, you'll see important calendar dates in terms of when classes begin. Labor Day is stated there. The last day to drop, November 20th. And then we have Thanksgiving holiday, final exams, and so on. And then when the grades are due. And the last 2 pages deal with tentative course schedule and assignments, how we're moving week by week, and then when we have an exam. So this is more or less, when we're going to be having the exams, October 2nd. This is when you submit the first exam. The second exam you submitted by November 6th. And then you submit the report on December 5th. And then December 12th, you submit the final exam. Now, speaking of which, you say, okay, so where do we submit the work? So when you look at the content section, there is a folder titled Submit Work, Upload All Coursework in this section. You click on it, and it takes you to the 5 links or upload tabs, if you will, for each one of those assignments. This is where you submit all the work by the due date. Once the due date comes along, you go and submit it again where you see the final exam or second exam, first exam, so on. Again, you submit all the work here. Okay? So it's very, very simple to navigate because it's mainly, in this course, mainly we're using content here under Blackboard Ultra. When you see the top menu here, it is mainly content. All the course content is here. What we got is the syllabus, the instructional materials, the course assignment, and submit work. Everything is here. Like I said, I will be sending you on a weekly basis 2 emails indicating which video lecture you're supposed to be watching. So I'm keeping, of course, a certain rhythm, a certain pace in this course in terms of communicating with you and telling you which documents have to be reviewed. Whenever the exam is coming up, I'm going to send you also the document indicating that, the deadline is approaching, the first exam must be uploaded by the due date, and so on and so forth. So I'm actually really communicating with the class via Blackboard announcements that are being emailed to you to inform you what is taking place week by week. Okay? So this is all I have for you. Once again, this is U.S. History 1301. My name is Alfonso R. Lopez. I'll be your instructor for this class this semester. And I hope this video presentation covered everything that you needed to know regarding this class. If you have any questions, please let me know. Remember, via email is easiest and fastest. And I'll be responding very quickly to your emails. Okay? I'll be posting this video tomorrow, Monday, and I'll be sending the email announcement to you that the video is ready to watch. Okay? I'll see you then Monday. Thank you.